I think trustees often overstate that fear, and they should be. They ultimately the buck stops with them, and they are still responsible for the decisions they make in terms of how they manage their assets relative to their liabilities and the funding progression of the plan. But I think they can still retain the big levers. That, you know, they're still going to be responsible for setting strategy and direction of de-risking, and those are the things, I said it before, those are the things that are going to make the difference between success and failure in this pension scheme. So I think it's entirely possible to put in a fiduciary management setup that retains the controls that really matter, the ones that make the difference, and give control of the other decisions that are still important, but give them to somebody else who really is expert in making those decisions. So I think it's an overdone fear that trustees may have. Somebody made the point that some trustee boards quite like meeting managers and doing that because they feel it justifies their existence, especially if there's an investment committee, maybe with some investment expertise around the table. They don't like the idea of losing that because that's the area they feel they bring to the equation. In reality, you have to question whether that still would be better done by somebody else who's doing it every day as their day job. So I think it's an overblown fear. I think trustees can retain as much control of the things that really matter as they wish. And as people have said, if your fiduciary manager is flexible and will work with you around that, I see no reason for trustees to fear that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is trustees often worry about loss of control, but the trustees generally are notoriously bad at making decisions. And I think in many situations that's arguably a worse thing because decisions don't get taken when they should get taken, and certainly perhaps not considered when they should be considered, whereas this whole framework that we're trying to put in place for fiduciary management really is to address that. And I think, you know, as Anne said, what we're trying to do is put in place effectively a flight plan, and that flight plan is something that the trustees have great input to in terms of setting and the direction of. You can put great controls around that so that the trustees can be comfortable within the exact parameters of which the fiduciary manager is operating. So yes, you give up some control, but you're controlling the boundaries of what you're actually giving up. So I think that should give great comfort to trustees going down that route.
This is probably the one objection or concern that I hear most often, and I actually understand it, because it's not unlike running a business. I mean, you've got as a trustees, you've got an awful lot on your plate. You've got limited time, limited expertise on the trustee board. Yet all these decisions need to get made. So how are you going to organize it? And I think many trustees would do well to think about their day job and think about how their company is run. I've been building a company here in the UK over the last few years, and I've had to face the same decision. Yes, I can retain all decision-making power and everything, in which case I'm formally in control of everything. I can tell you we wouldn't be very successful because even if I had the expertise in every area, which I don't, I wouldn't have the time to make all those decisions at the right time, and not just the right time, but also in the right way, the right quality of decision. So you end up delegating certain decisions, and this is probably the most important and the most difficult question to answer as a trustee. What is my role as a trustee in the overall governance of the scheme? What decisions do I as a trustee, or in my case I as a managing director, need to retain, and which ones can I delegate? Once you've decided that, the next question is, how do I delegate and to whom? And I think there's 2 points. One, Anne raised the point, and we've talked extensively about it. You don't want to just sign a blank check when you delegate. You need to set a clear objective, agree a clear objective, and set constraints. So that you delegate in a controlled way. And the second question I'd be asking myself is, to whom do I delegate? You're going to look for somebody who understands you, who is aligned with your goals, We're owned by pension funds. We get all of that. To work in the interests of the trustees and to. One of the worst things that can happen is when you delegate to somebody who's got conflicts of interest or other priorities or other ambitions that don't necessarily meet your own goals. And then you can have all the controls in place that you want to, but that person that you're hiring is always going to try and cross those borders. Yeah. That's not a recipe for success. So I think there's two. First, think about your role as a trustee. What decisions should you really retain yourself? Which ones are you better off to delegate? And then once you have decided that, think about objectives and constraints and look for somebody who's aligned with your interests.
Malcolm, should your fellow trustees fear loss of control?
I don't think.
Or do you sleep more at night? Do you sleep better at night?
I think you do, because I think this question about trustees losing control is somewhat overstated, in my opinion. The reason I say that is because on the traditional model, you appoint a consultant. So what difference? You appoint a consultant, you put your trust in that consultant for however long you're associated with them, and instead of that, you're appointing a fiduciary manager. And when you come to things like selection of fund managers, which is inevitably what trustees then get involved in, you're not looking at the whole universe of fund managers. You're not looking at 2,000, 5,000 different fund managers. You're given a selection by your consultant who you've appointed of maybe 6. And out of that you might actually meet 3. So, you're led in a certain direction. You don't have that control that you can choose whatever you like. You're advised and you're led in a certain direction. And so in my view, to link up the whole thing and have, in effect, one body working in partnership with you is a much safer, much more control than having a disparate lot of fund managers which have a certain allegiance to your consultant. So it's not independent really at all. So as I say, I think it's overstated, and if trustees really consider what control they have compared with in this fiduciary manager what control they have, they will see that they're not really giving up any control at all.
Paul said earlier on that trustees are bad at making decisions.
I think slow.
I think slow is the word.
Do you want to rush to the defence of your or do you think that's
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah. And I think what you have is a model that in fact either through the trustees request, or in fact through the job that the fiduciary manager is doing, you actually act much quicker. Yeah. Either because you've worked out a strategy that you've delegated the implementation of, and so at the right time the fiduciary manager can take that decision, or even you've got the various mechanisms in place that even if the trustees want to move on a certain thing, through the fiduciary manager, they can then implement something very quickly. And so I think it's absolutely right. Trustees only meet infrequently, however you want to define that, and it does give a mechanism that you've got a controlled environment in which implementation of the strategic decisions can take place. Yep.
Trustees are also not only, they might not be good at making timely decisions, they might not be good at making good decisions, and the two things are important. You can imagine an environment where you're in an equity bull market, and the rational fiduciary decision would be to take some risk off the table, whereas fear and greed, all those things, trustees, especially if they are predominantly a lay body, can be swept along by emotion in the market, what's the directional move of the market. Like at the moment, bond yields are too low to take risk off the table. That may be right, but it still might be right to take some risk off the table. And a fiduciary manager who's less emotional about those things will probably make better decisions as well as more timely decisions. So I think the two things are important. It's not just about getting the timing right. It's about getting more decisions right. Fiduciary managers won't get all the decisions right. Hopefully they'll get more decisions right than a body of trustees who are predominantly non-expert in that field.
I would actually add a third dimension to that. So Anne has said, we've got to make the right decision. Paul has said, we've got to make that right decision at the right time. And then I think it was Guion actually in an earlier answer referred to, and then you've got to make sure that you execute that decision in the right way, taking into account liquidity in the market, other kinds of market conditions. Do you have in-house capability to actually
Nail it.
just take risk off the table right then and there, or do you need to do it through an instruction to yet another manager who then... Yeah. And the big risk is getting delays. That's why we actually believe that having an in-house asset management capability of some sort is really important in a fiduciary manager. It's not that you need to deploy it everywhere and all the time, but when the time is there and you need to act quickly, it could be firing a manager and temporarily taking care of the portfolio. You need to be able to do that. That means you need in-house resource, in-house expertise in asset management. So I think we've come up with a nice triumvirate of right decision at the right time, executed in the right way.
Guion, do you want to throw it?
Oh yeah, well the thing is, it's a difference between being in charge and being in control. And I think no one disagrees with the idea that the trustees are in charge, and that doesn't change through the transition from a sort of a legacy advisory basis to a fiduciary basis. What fiduciary management should do is put in place the tools and the decision-making framework to put trustees in more control. So the idea that fiduciary management is a model whereby trustees essentially hand over their pension scheme to some third party and come back once a year to check on how it's going is not one that I think many trustees find attractive, and for very good reasons indeed. I think a model whereby the role of the fiduciary manager is to empower the trustees, to help them make the decisions better, and then to make sure once the decisions are made, they can be, as Remco has pointed out quite clearly, executed in an efficient and timely fashion. That is what puts the trustees in better control than they have now, and that's really what the purpose of fiduciary management.